everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Gretchen and today I'm back with another Booker Prize Longlist review, and today's title is Held by Anne Michaels. And this is a book that is a little hard to describe as far as what the book is about, but I will do my best. So basically this book starts in 1917 on a battlefield, and we have our primary character, or one of them. His name is John, and he's been injured after a blast, and he is lying there in this injured state, and he is physically kind of going in and out of consciousness. And as he is doing that, he is reminiscing about his girlfriend, or I can't remember if it was his wife at the time, but her name is Helen. And he's basically, thinking of all of these fond memories that he has of her. And then when we move to the second chapter, it is basically him returning to England from the war, and he is trying to get his photography business that he had prior to the war back up and running. And from there, what we start to realize is, he came back from the war, he was injured, and he came back alive, but the war is still very much a part of him. And he came back from that war with missing pieces of him, and he's trying to get back to that point of, remembering who he was and trying to get his life off the ground with this injury that he has, and, with the new state of what the world is, and he is struggling. And one of the very interesting parts of the plot of this book is he, as a photographer, is starting to take these pictures, and when he's developing them, he starts to notice that there are like images and ghosts that are appearing in these pictures, and that kind of sets the tone for the rest of the story. And we start to move to different characters and different people, and by the end of the book we've covered, I think, about 4 generations of people, and we learn a little bit about each of their stories, and there is always something that is connecting those stories somehow. So this book is very much a bit like a puzzle in a sense, because there are connections that are threaded throughout, and you can read one story and get a bit of John, and you could read another story and get a bit of his wife Helen, or there's another story that happens and you're not even getting either of them, you're getting a completely different cast of characters, and that story is being connected to a different group of people. And pairing that kind of fragmented writing with the fact that Anne Michaels is a poet, her writing is very lush, and it's very flowery, and it's very dense and full of meaning and metaphor. And although this is a novel that is written in prose, it still reads like poetry, and you very much have to pay attention to what is being said. And when I was reading this, I started it, and the first few chapters I felt were very accessible. I was reading them and I was following along with everything that was happening. The story and the plot were there along with the poetry. But then as the story started to progress, I started to get lost in the plot, and if there was a plot, I really couldn't find it. And the poetry and the meaning and all of that other stuff was starting to overshadow the story for me. And by the middle of this, I was starting to get very bored and frustrated. And even though I was reading very beautiful words and sentences, and there was so much imagery, and I really appreciate the way that she was writing and her descriptions of things, and she was definitely able to make me feel things. This was a very emotional read. There was a lot going on, and Ann Michaels has a true talent for conjuring up all kinds of feelings, but at the end of the day, I just felt like I was reading random snippets or, little vignettes of beautiful pieces of poetry that didn't really end up connecting. And if there was a connection, I just wasn't smart enough to understand or realize what was happening. And I think that that's probably due to a couple things. Either I really don't have the capacity to fully truly understand the meaning of what she was saying, or I just didn't take enough time with it to fully process things. I think that this book was very deceiving for me because of how it was so small in chunks and fragments that me as a reader, I tended to have my pacing off with it. I felt like I was reading it like I would read a novel, but I really needed to read this as slowly as I would read a poem. And I really struggled with that. There were parts of this book that were very easy to follow at the pace of a novel, but then there were times when I found myself reading a sentence or a paragraph and I was like, whoa, I really have to go back and read that again because I know I'm missing something. And it just totally threw the pacing off for me. And this book, although I feel like if I had the time to really take it fragment by fragment, I would have found a lot of beauty and meaning in this book. But because I just didn't know what pace to settle on, it became a slog and it was extremely frustrating for me. And by the time that this book was done, I was so lost, I was so in the weeds, and I was so happy for it to be over. And I know that there is going to be a group of readers out there that absolutely adore this, but unfortunately, I didn't take the time, I think, to dedicate to this book enough to be one of them. This is a book that I don't hate it by any means. I just think that it's a case of a book that I'm just never going to gel with. And it's just not the type of book that I would be patient enough for, or one that I could find enjoyment in. But there are definitely readers that are going to totally embrace the long journey that they could go on with a book like this and just eat up every single word and sentence and be able to sit with it for a while and let it settle and, wash over them. But unfortunately, I just didn't have the time to do that. And if the plot had been more evident and it had been more interesting to me, I think that I would have maybe wanted to take a greater chance on it. But once that initial plot line with John and his photography studio and the pictures with the ghosts started to fade out of the novel, that is really when I started to lose interest. And if that part of the story had kept going, I definitely think that I could have enjoyed this a lot more. So sadly, this was a miss for me, but I can see how a certain reader would enjoy it. But I am going to say that I would think probably 80% of readers are going to find this a slog and find it extremely boring and wonder how a book like this could have made the long list. I just don't personally have the brain power to appreciate a book like that, and that's on me. I am glad I read it. I'm glad I didn't give up on it, but at the end of the day, it just wasn't for me. I would actually be really curious to maybe go back and read some of her poetry and and not a long piece of poetry disguised as a novel, and see if maybe I appreciate her poetry more. But yeah, sadly, definitely a miss for me. And yeah, there are still a couple books left for me to read. There are several videos I still have to do, but as I'm starting to get toward the end, there's only 2 books yet that I have to finish. I was initially really excited with this long list, and I thought that there were going to be a lot of books in it that really surprised me, and the longer I get into this journey, the more I realize that this has probably been one of the most boring Booker seasons ever, and although there were some definite standout books for me, I'm just struggling in general to make it to the finish line. So wish me luck, but you will definitely see me back for some more review videos, and until we read again, bye!